The vast expanse of Canada, with its picturesque landscapes and bustling urban centres, hides a sombre reality. Every year, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police state that somewhere between 70,000 and 80,000 individuals are reported missing. While the vast majority of these cases are fortunately resolved quickly, with loved ones being reunited and the unknown being put to bed, there exists a small yet deeply unsettling subset of disappearances that come to defy the norm or have odd qualities to them. The first case I wanted to draw your attention to was the disappearance of a 2-year-old girl called Evelyn Raj, who vanished from her family farm on the 15th of July 1934. This occurred near a town known as Rocky Mountain House in Alberta, which, as suggested, lies at the base of the Rocky Mountains. It was early that morning, around 9 AM, where Evelyn found herself outside with her father, John, who was spending some playful time with her just after finishing their family breakfast together. They were in the farmyard, but John did need to start work and he had to go tend the cows, which he'd planned to do first, and he didn't think it was going to take too much time that day. Their actual farm home and the barn were only a short distance from where they both stood, and they were practically right in the middle between them. He told Evelyn that he needed to start work and that she needed to go back to the house. He watched her run towards the house and could see that she was close. To be clear, their farm was rural and quite a distance away from the town, with only one road leading to it, so it's not as if you'd be expecting to see anyone around. So as John left and turned his attention to the cows, this left Evelyn alone, almost back at the farmhouse. Now, something happened during this time of separation that isn't at all clear. John spent around an hour that morning tending to the cows, and he was done sooner than he expected. As John was finishing up, he hurried back to the farmhouse, anticipating Evelyn's cheerful smile and laughter as he would usually be met with. But on this occasion, he wouldn't have it. Instead, he was met with an eerie silence, followed by a panic when his wife realised that Evelyn and John weren't together. It's not difficult to imagine, but they both began to freak out. John ran outside and started to call for her quite frantically, but it didn't matter in which direction he looked. It was just an empty farm. John searched for her in desperation, but for whatever reason, he just could not locate her at all. She wasn't responding to his shouts. It was as if she'd somehow gotten very far away suspiciously quickly. John and the family had been searching for a couple of hours at this point in his panic before they realised they needed help. This was around noon when the gravity of the situation became clear to John, and this sanctuary that was the family farm that they'd known and loved now must have seemed quite endless and threatening. The authorities and the surrounding community were made aware of what had happened, and an all-out search was launched. Thankfully, it seems that John and his family were well liked, and they had over 150 boots on his property the same day as law enforcement got the word out. All things considered, barring the family's initial search, this was a quick response. I get the sense that these locals all knew one another and were closely knit based on the articles, and it was said that they were all filled with the determination and hope to bring her back. Together, being led by professional search and rescue coordinators, they searched every nook and cranny of that farm. The barn was the initial focus, thinking that perhaps she'd gone back to John. They combed through the tall cornstalks, but she wasn't there. The entire perimeter of that farm was searched and researched, but they just couldn't find her. When that failed, there was an air of confusion, as it seemed that most didn't believe that she could have left the farm. But because the search had failed, it forced them to spread out to the surrounding areas. As the sun began to set and darkness began to fall on the farm, I can only imagine the anguish that John and the family must have been feeling. That particular moment must have been a truly horrible and hopeless feeling that I can only hope that everyone watching this never has to suffer. The search did continue overnight, but at a reduced scale because now the dangers of the wilderness areas became highlighted. And the worst thing to have happen would be for someone else to go missing, or to have them get injured and need rescue. That would have caused chaos, and the whole area would have to have been searched from scratch again. teams would have been split up further, it would have just been a mess. So during the night, they only had professional searchers out looking for her. But of course, the likelihood of finding her in the dark dropped drastically. The following morning came with an air of urgency as it had been very cold overnight. Word of Evelyn's disappearance had spread like wildfire amongst the community, and as the sun began to rise, the number of searchers had surged to over 300 people. This was very good for a number of reasons. It was getting to the point that the organisers weren't sure exactly where to search next, as they didn't even have a direction of travel to work with. The dogs never found a scent anywhere on the farm or leading past the home, and she hadn't left any signs of her travel either, in the sense that no footprints or other tracks were ever found. So now, with that many people, they were able to use a brute force approach and just had teams of people all over the place looking for her. Various teams waded through the river, others grassland and forest areas, and some were out checking barns, sheds and other undergrowth. Close to noon that day, a man by the name of Joe Bertagnolli had been searching all morning, and he was there early. He was searching the wetlands, now covered in mud, hot and sweating, where he heard a faint cry which was over 1.5 miles away from the farm. Standing in tall grass beside a slough, she was crying bitterly when she was found by Joe, a farmer who was one of the search party. She was hurried home, found to be suffering from no ill effects except exhaustion, and was put to bed. She was unable to explain where she had been and how she had lived through 2 hot days and 2 cold nights without food since she vanished early Sunday. Unfortunately, Evelyn was not able to articulate exactly what had happened, and it was said that she didn't actually remember what happened to her. She was probably highly disoriented, confused, and might even have blocked it out of her mind, which can happen where trauma is related. Her young age also will have made it a problem to try to explain it. John and the family didn't really understand what had happened. He stopped to watch her run back to the house, and he believed that she was about to go inside, which she always did. I suppose he quite literally must have turned his back before she got inside. But I wonder what happened in those few moments. Did something catch her attention and she just took off after it? One big worry was that she'd been snatched by an animal, but that was swiftly ruled out after she was found. The searchers did wonder how she'd managed to stay warm overnight. Specific temperatures weren't given, other than the suggestion that it was dangerous, especially for someone so young who wasn't dressed appropriately for it. It's actually a fairly good point too. Obviously, these oddities and these disappearances are kind of just put aside after the missing has been found, because there's just a sense of elation that it's over and there's been a good ending. But I wonder what she did to keep warm. How exactly did she go missing in the first place so close to the home, and what did her time missing actually look like? I'd imagine her parents had a million questions for her too, but unfortunately there was never anything else said about it. That was the end of the paper trail also, so at least it had the best ending it could have, despite the fact that the parents didn't really understand the hows and whys of the situation. Now, let's explore the next one, which also took place in Alberta. In the heart of Alberta stretches a vast expanse of protected wilderness named Elk Island National Park. On a seemingly ordinary 29th of June in 1979, the Rema family decided once more to partake in an activity that they absolutely loved doing together, which was exploring and hiking what are supposed to be their relatively safe national parks. This was a family that loved spending time together hiking, and it seems that this is a passion they wanted to pass down to Kevin, who also seemed to have a natural love for these wilderness areas. Velma and Peter, Kevin's parents, alongside his 2 older brothers and sister, found a spot that they liked the look of and decided to pitch their tent in the north end of the park. But as dawn turned to mid-morning on the same day, they were abruptly forced into a mad panic as they came to the realization that Kevin was simply not present anymore. A search for a 9-year-old boy missing in Elk Island National Park continued today, with Canadian Armed Forces teams preparing to help. No clues have been found to the whereabouts of Kevin Rema of Edmonton. It's so frustrating because we have absolutely nothing to go on. Virtually all trails have already been covered by dogs. The lake is not conducive to dragging because of high grass, but divers have searched the area, said RCMP Constable John Oman. This is very interesting, and you'll notice that John directly referenced the dogs being unable to find a scent anywhere. He knew full well that this was a highly unusual factor in the disappearance because Kevin had literally vanished right beneath his parents' noses at the campsite. To further clarify that point, Velma and Peter did not see anyone else around them at the time, nor did they hear anything out of the ordinary. It's not clear exactly when it happened, but Kevin was around while they were putting the tent together, but at some point at noon, around the time the parents were cooking, he managed to vanish so thoroughly that the dogs could not find a scent anywhere. Which common sense indicates doesn't make sense. It does not add up that a small boy could disappear in this place and not leave a scent trail in the direction he took. The dogs were brought to the campsite and they just sat down. They didn't have anything to follow, which is particularly odd. Just based off the articles, it seems that a lot of hope was placed on the dogs to explain exactly where he went. The RCMP also go on to state in the article that they found small footprints in the area. I believe it was initially felt that these were left behind by Kevin, but when the dogs couldn't locate a scent in the area, they deemed them as irrelevant to the case. To clarify, the small footprints were alone, about the right size for Kevin, but they quickly petered out and couldn't be followed, even by the expert trackers that were among the 100 initial searches. Just as a further point actually, some might find it interesting that armed forces were involved, but this was probably for extra numbers and also to preserve the safety of the searchers. I'd imagine that there is quite a lot of potentially dangerous wildlife in the area, and especially as they branched out deeper into the wilderness. But Canadians will know better than I do here, so please do let me know in the comments if bears among other predators are common there. Anyway, you'll note that Kevin disappeared 4 days before that article was written. So this search had been ongoing for a while now, and nothing was turning up outside of the first set of footprints. It actually seems that the search leaders were left a bit clueless as to how to proceed, and that isn't a dig at them, there were no leads at all. It was very difficult for them to know where they were even actually supposed to search at that stage. So with that desperation in mind, they requested assistance from the Fort Saskatchewan jail, and 100 low-risk prisoners volunteered themselves to join the search. Think of that what you will, but it is understandable if they just wanted to flood the area with even more people for that brute force approach, which, if you have no leads at all, is really your only option. John Oman said that to see such unexpected help was a major boost to morale. He also pointed out that a significant number of these individuals were of Metis and Native American ancestry and knew the land like the back of their hands. That was actually quite an interesting decision to have made. It shows an air of desperation from the RCMP, and I'd imagine the hope that some of these people had some rather great tracking skills which were severely in need. However, that hope quickly drained when the combined efforts of over 350 people that day led to no significant leads or even a sign of Kevin, leading John to say, if he isn't found within the next day, it's unlikely he'll survive. More than 350 volunteers, plus an assortment of clairvoyants, failed to turn up any clues Wednesday. We don't plan to give up until there is absolutely no hope. I always find it particularly interesting when the authorities get clairvoyants involved. I personally have always thought that it was a waste of time and a source of false hope, but I have covered a number of disappearances in the past in which someone who dreamed of the missing ended up finding them. It's really quite a bizarre thing, so maybe there's more to it, who knows. At some point, I'll go back through all of the disappearances I've covered that have ended in such a way, and I'll put a compilation together, so please do let me know if you'd be interested in that. Anyway, continuing on, Velma and Peter expressed their sheer incredulity at 2 things. Firstly, the fact that they couldn't even come to terms with how Kevin even managed to leave in the first place, and 2, the sheer scale of the search that was repeatedly, day after day, ending in failure. They essentially made the point that Kevin did not have a habit of wandering away from them and would usually stay close to them. I'm paraphrasing, but they also said that for this search to be spectacularly failing in the way that it was must have meant that Kevin had managed to move a seemingly impossible distance away from the camp, or it means that he was taken. The obvious problem with the first suggestion was that he was 9 years old and really should not have been able to outpace the many hundreds of adults now scouring the area for him. While possible of course and should never be ruled out, The idea of him being taken runs into trouble because the family had said that there was no one around their camp. More specifically, it seems that something happened as the parents were cooking. They'd taken their eyes off Kevin as they were prepping together, and in those moments when they were distracted, whatever that something was now meant that he was completely out of the area. It's interesting to think about because the dogs had been up and down the area along all trails and they hadn't found Kevin's scent at any point, which suggests to me quite strongly that he simply wasn't even there anymore. Now where he went and how he left is another story entirely which isn't known. The professionals among the searchers were quite certain that it wasn't animal predation, as that usually becomes quite clear early on, and the likelihood is that the dogs would have picked up on that. As mentioned, the family said that there was nobody around them, so what happened? I should also point out that his brothers and sister also didn't hear or notice him leave. This next part is somewhat bizarre, but on the 8th day of the search, I'm sure that you can imagine the constable and the professional searchers now believed that they were looking for a body. The parents, on the other hand, were essentially stating that they didn't know why, but they felt he was still alive. Velma went on to say something particularly unusual. Mrs. Rema said she dreamed 4 times on Friday of a cave ringed with a halo, but was told by wardens there were no caves in the area. I have no real comments to make about that, other than it was just something interesting that was reported. Now, let's hear some specifics of the search itself. The RCMP called off the search for Kevin. Police said every conceivable area had been covered, some repeatedly by helicopter, fixed-wing aircraft, boats, scuba divers, dragging operations, tracking dogs, men on horseback and on foot. Infrared scanners from helicopters and clairvoyants were also used in the search. An effort that involved 15,000 man-hours by civilian volunteers, RCMP officers, prisoners and 144 soldiers. The RCMP constable coordinating the search said that the disappearance appeared to be more than just a little boy lost in the woods. "We have covered far beyond where the boy could have got to," said Constable John Oman. "I've never been in a search that has been this intensive. The foot search was the last resort, and now that has failed." So, with the statement that the incident was more than that of just a little boy lost in the woods, it seems that John, by this time, was fully aware of how out of the ordinary this entire incident was. I find it quite fascinating, to be honest, that the tracking dogs never found his scent once. That's not typical. I am also now finding out for the first time that at some point on the day that Kevin vanished, a woman had seen a small boy who asked for directions back to his family's campsite. I'm not sure what was going on there. The later papers seem to be suggesting that this was definitely Kevin, but I'm not sure if that was ever actually completely proven. Although whether it was or wasn't him, if a 9-year-old boy appears to be lost and asking for directions, I might suggest as an adult to actually physically take the boy back. It's unbelievable that this entire incident could have been avoided if that actually was Kevin, of course. So this whole time I've been operating under the idea that Kevin could not have been physically taken by another person from the campsite, as that would have been heard and likely seen by the family. But if we're saying that under the nose of his brothers, sister and parents he had first walked away far enough to come into contact with other people, well, that changes the equation entirely. If it was in fact Kevin that came into contact with the woman and asked for directions, he very well could have come into contact with other people who were less well-intentioned. It is interesting that the dogs never found his scent, which actually makes it seem even more likely now that he had been completely extracted from the park. There's no evidence of that, of course, but the probability of that seems to be quite high at this stage. Even still though, you might have expected the dogs to have found the area in which Kevin had walked to first. A professional tracker by the name of Tom Brown Jr. seems to have come to a similar conclusion. To date, the only clues discovered arise from Tom Brown Jr.'s claim that he found Kevin's footprints and a tuft of hair, and that he could chart the child's movements at the park from noon to 4:30 PM the day he went missing. Known as the Tracker, Mr. Brown claims he has located more than 600 of the 1,000 missing persons he has sought. The Tracker's conclusion: Kevin was taken from the park. That is basically the end of the paper trail for Kevin. he was never found inside or outside of the park. He was a young boy that quite literally just dropped off the radar and was never seen again. I'd like to hear some thoughts in regards to this disappearance. Do you think he was taken by someone, or do you think something else happened? At this point, I realise that I've covered 2 disappearances from Canada over a year ago that seem to fit the themes of this video very closely. And because of that, they are worth sharing and covering again in this context. So let's begin with the first. Lynn Mary Hilia was 2.5 years old when she disappeared from a heavily wooded area in Vancouver in July of 1986. At the time, Lynn was staying with her parents, sister, and grandparents at a cabin on Horn Lake. The moment of disappearance isn't all that clear, other than Lynn obviously must have wandered away from the cabin at some point for some reason that isn't known. This particular cabin was pretty secluded, with one road in and one road out, and the family were inside the cabin when this took place. So it seems that one way or another, Lynn had let herself out, which is strange because her parents stated that she didn't have a history of doing this and was usually glued to them. Around 300 searchers kept their hopes alive Sunday as they combed dense woods near this Vancouver Island community for Lynn, who went missing from her parents' cabin on Thursday, but they admit that time is running out for the toddler. There is speculation that she might have been mauled by a bear or cougar, drowned, or is slowly passing away due to exposure. We have to go on the assumption that she is still alive out there, said RCMP Staff Sergeant Ron Nicholas. Your guess is as good as mine about her chances, but we have to keep on hoping. Nicholas discounted suggestions that Lynn might have been taken. All the evidence is that she is in the bush, Nicholas said. The reason for the quick dismissal was twofold. Firstly, authorities absolutely do not want to give people any reason to panic, and so will often outright dismiss that in any disappearance that isn't absolutely clear cut. The second reason, and probably more important in this instance, is the fact that, as said previously, there was one road in and one road out. The family never saw anyone else while they were there, and obviously no vehicles or anything like that. Another point that should be cleared up is that Lynn actually disappeared on the 24th of July, and the first article I could find was on the 28th of the same month, so she'd been missing for 4 days already, despite 300 searchers scouring the area by this time. Now it seems to me that the authorities were spooked and obviously very concerned here because they put some serious effort at getting the word out, and quite literally the following day there was over 400 people searching. Meanwhile, the search force looking for Lynn grew to more than 400 people Monday, but police say that time is running out for the little girl. Searchers have checked and rechecked the thickly wooded area surrounding the cabin, using dogs and infrared scanning gear, said Ron Nicholas. We've just about exhausted all leads, he said. Time is running out, if it hasn't run out already. The search has been widened to cover mountain and valley areas it was originally believed that the little girl couldn't reach. Somewhere along the line, we've covered all this ground. It just doesn't look good, said Nicholas. Clearly, because of the time lapsed, 5 days at this point, there was an atmosphere around the search that things were not looking good anymore. This was fueled, obviously, by the fact that they hadn't located her, but it was actually worse than that. Not only had they not located her, they couldn't even determine where she might have gone. Somehow, she'd left no trace of her presence anywhere, no footprints or anything of that nature. The searchers were of the opinion that they should have found something by now because she was 2 years old and really shouldn't have been able to get very far. They also made note of the fact that there were no signs of animal predation anywhere, which is usually very clear and can't really be mistaken. I'm absolutely certain that behind closed doors they must have been considering the idea that Lynn may have been taken, because after the time lapsed and nothing at all was being found, there are very few alternatives. The following day, Ron Nicholas effectively said that there had still been no trace of Lynn at all, and that they were considering winding down the search and bringing it to a close. True to his word, the search reportedly came to an end the following day. A week-long search for Lynn was called off yesterday. "We've just called the official search off," said Ron Nicholas. Police say they have no reason to believe that she was taken, but her great-grandfather, Ernie Miner, posted a $25,000 reward for her safe return. It was said at this point actually that not only did the family disagree with the authorities, but so did a lot of the searchers too. Many were of the opinion that Lynn wasn't even in that area anymore. This was because they hadn't found a trace of her, and the search dogs never once found a scent. However, a discovery would be made 3 days shy of a month after her initial disappearance. Lynn's body was discovered Tuesday after she vanished from her parents' cabin July 24, has been taken to Vancouver for a forensic examination. The body was found in dense brush about 30 metres off a logging road by 2 men scouting for signs of game in preparation for the fall hunting season. There were a couple of peculiarities with this find. Firstly, the searching parties had been present in this area initially and obviously didn't find her. This could mean that she was found in an area already searched, though there's no way of saying if they checked that specific spot or not, though the dogs never found a scent. Secondly, something the searchers found strange was the fact that she had travelled quite some distance, all uphill. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a distance from this spot to the cabin, only that she had supposedly travelled uphill the entire time. Let's have a look at the moment of discovery. Lynn's body, apparently, was under a piece of fallen timber, said Nicholas. It would appear she slid in under the log and that's where she expired. There's no evidence at the scene to indicate foul play, Nicholas said, adding there was also no sign the girl had been attacked by an animal. Lynn hadn't sustained any injuries as far as I can tell, and obviously Nicholas made the point that she hadn't been attacked by an animal. There were no further reports after this, and the circumstances of her disappearance largely remain unknown. Lynn, who was known for being glued to her parents, wandered away from the cabin and made her way uphill for reasons we don't know. The searchers weren't sure how she got to a final destination, nor was she found when this area was searched previously. Was she there the entire time? What happened to Lynn Mary Hilia? 7-year-old William Pilkington disappeared from the small town of Tofino on Vancouver Island in February of 2008. This town has a small population of around 2,000 people. At the time of his disappearance, he was with his brother and parents who had travelled from Bellingham to have a relaxing vacation in the small town and to visit the beaches there. David, William's father, had woken up early one morning during this trip and decided to go for a walk on the beach to pass some time before everyone else got up. As he was getting ready to leave, William heard him and asked to come with him. Now, it's pretty difficult to imagine the situation exactly, because I couldn't find much in the way of specific reporting on this. But at some point during this walk on the beach, William disappeared. From what I can gather, William kept lagging behind as he was getting distracted and was playing in the sand. The father kept hurrying him each time he realised he was behind him, but the final time he would look back for William, he simply wasn't there anymore. Volunteers poured to Vancouver Island on Friday, offering their help in the search for an 8-year-old Washington State boy, last seen playing on a rocky beach. The parking lot of the Tofino Community Hall was packed with police and rescue vehicles, as well as the cars of local residents who showed up in rain gear and boots. Adjacent to the beach, bordering with thick woods, and unfortunately the search leaders had no idea where he might have gone, there were 3 ideas floating around. The first being that he might have gotten too close to the water and been swept away, that he might have wandered into the woods and got lost, or he might have been taken by someone into the town. It's important to note that David never heard anything to suggest that William had fallen into the water, and said that he was actually nowhere near it when he last looked. It's also noteworthy that there wasn't anyone else on the beach at that time either, and they were alone. Obviously, I don't know the exact distance between the pair at the time, but I believe it was around 30 feet or so. It seems unlikely to me that he would fall into the water and you just wouldn't hear anything, though of course we don't have much context. It's also hard to imagine that someone might have taken him here too. Given the small population, it makes events like this less likely, though of course not impossible. And again, David had said that he didn't see anyone else nearby. Garth Cameron of West Coast Inland Search and Rescue said it was the biggest search in the area in a long time. Searchers fanned out across the town and into the woods, resorts and beaches. By evening, crew members lit a bonfire where William was last seen. Cameron said the idea of the boy making it overnight wasn't impossible. He went on to say that it was actually probable that he would. So clearly, at this stage, the thinking must have been that William had wandered into the woods. William did actually suffer from attention deficit disorder, so he will have been somewhat easily distracted. It could have been that he spotted an animal or something interesting that grabbed his attention, which caused him to wander off in that direction. Of course, we'll never know for sure if that even happened. Now, interestingly enough, footprints were never mentioned. You'd think that on a beach you would leave clear indentations of the direction you took. That's not to say there weren't any, but they weren't reported. Over 200 searchers were present on this search, and they had a bunch of search dogs too, who never found a scent at any point, which is just odd. There were First Nations people involved too, who were considered expert trackers, and they too never found a trace of William. Searchers said that they weren't sure if William had been taken by the sea because in all likelihood his body would have washed back up onto the shore, which never happened. This search went on for 3 days before it came to an end. This seems like a relatively short search, especially since this forest area is absolutely massive, but the problem was that they had absolutely no clues whatsoever. The Canadian military helped out and put up aircraft too, but this didn't help. Ultimately, William was never found. Even to this day, not even a single clue exists as to what might have happened. Was he taken? Did he fall into the water? Or did something happen in the forest? What do you think? I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.